All right, the playoffs are almost here, and the Winning Place podcast is back. My name is Brian Robb, and I'm thrilled to be joined today, making his debut on the Winning Place podcast, Tim McKone of 98.5 The Sports Hub. Tim, it's a pleasure to have you here. We have a lot of ground to cover. Famously known for the one of the first and only hosts of Celtics at 7 on 98.5 The Sports Hub. Rest in peace, Celtics at 7. Yes. But yes, you can catch Tim regularly throughout the week, filling in, and also weekends with usually Leroy Irvin there. You guys are been tag teaming a lot there on the weekends of the Hub. But Tim, how are you?
Yeah, thrilled to be here. You're right. Celtics at 7 is where I got my start. It was definitely it was put to bed shortly after I started hosting. So hopefully this podcast has a little longer shelf life. But yeah, excited to be here, and I'll try not to tank this for you too.
Well, we're recording this in the evening, so this is hopefully better hours for the podcast here. But let's start here. So we're entering the final week of the regular season here. We're recording this on a Tuesday night. It looks like right now the Miami Heat are about to win against the Charlotte Hornets. That's going to put them 2.5 games above the Celtics with 3 to play here. And to be honest, the Celtics have the tiebreaker, but Miami closes with the Hawks and a road game against the tanking Orlando team. So is it safe to say right now, can we officially put the 1 seed off the table for the Boston Celtics based on this turn of events?
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer because it felt like it was kind of trending in the right direction, especially when you had Jimmy Butler trying to fight Eric Spoelstra.
Yeah, right.
This time a week ago. It felt like things were starting to line up, like maybe the Celtics could actually pull this off and grab the 1 seed. But you're right, when you kind of look at the paths towards the end of the season, especially with the Celtics finishing up with Milwaukee and Memphis down the stretch, and like you said, there's just there's too much ground to cover at this point. So I think unfortunately the 1 seed's off the table, but the reality of the situation is, B-Rob, I can't believe we're even talking about the 1 seed at this point from where we were at January 1st to even consider that this would be on the table. I think it is pretty impressive by the Celtics, but yeah, I think you're right. At this point, we need to kind of put that talk to bed.
And, like you said, the Celtics, so they close out. They're at Chicago Wednesday, at Memphis Thursday, finished up, at Milwaukee Thursday in obviously a pivotal game when it comes to the 2 and the 3 seed, and then closing out against the Memphis team that will be playing for nothing to close out the regular season. You bring up the rise in the standings and how crazy it is that we're even talking about this. I wonder if you look at the record books here, like even 11-2 jump from like the midway point of the season, that has to be close to a historic leap just based on, how far down they were and how they pretty much played like the 96 Bulls for like a 30-game stretch there. And made this a conversation.
The sample size at this point is crazy for the Celtics to honestly be one of, if not the best team in the NBA. It feels like really since the start of the new year. And you're right. Like, I remember on that West Coast swing, especially remember that game where they beat the Sixers in the low 80s and then they go out and they get whacked by the Jazz, give up 137 points on that first game of that West Coast swing. And I'm like, so this is what this is good. We're just going to be talking about the play-in tournament again for the Boston Celtics here is pretty much what we're going to be doing. And they've flipped that switch. And yeah, I thought honestly coming into the year, you were going to look at a 4 or a 5 seed when you just kind of looked at how deep the East was this year. And obviously certainly surpassed my expectations. And yeah, I did not see a run like this coming. I don't think anybody did, quite frankly. But yeah, it's pretty impressive where they're at right now.
No, I mean, at that point in January, the conversation was like, okay, so how do they, like Al Horford, you got to shop him, like Smart, like everyone on the table, Schroeder, Richardson. I mean, and some of those guys ultimately were moved anyway, which was, the credit to the front office to kind of picking the right parts to keep and to move on from. But yeah, it was all about like, they can't keep this together because this would literally just be, you have to make a move one way or the other. You can't just like let it drag out like they did last season here and have it be another year of play-in talk.
Well, no, and the sample size at that point, right? You're looking at 1.5 years now with this group, and you're going, all right, like at some point, even though you really want this to work with what you kind of assembled, you have to kind of admit that for some reason, this kind of core and what you have going isn't working. And again, the fact that they were able to kind of to change this as dramatically and as quickly as they did, I think is really impressive. You go back to the beginning of the year, and obviously Ime is a new coach. You had Jalen out for that stretch at the beginning of the year too, which I wonder if that kind of played into stuff. But yeah, once they kind of got their footing underneath them and really hit the ground running in January. And, you go back to the start of it too, B-Rob, it wasn't like an overly impressive run of teams that they were beating at the start of this thing. It was kind of, a tomato can type run where they were knocking off, some pretty terrible teams. But again, that was something that we haven't seen them even do last year. They weren't winning games that they should be winning on a consistent basis. And that kind of started the ball rolling. And then, they've been an absolute wagon ever since.
It's a good point because a lot of those wins were masked by those teams. Like they usually we're down a good player, or like you said, it was just a bad team outright. So, they beat the Wizards by 30, great. And then you took care of business against the Pacers twice or whatever. And you're right. It did kind of mask it. And then, but at the same time, it's when you win by 30 night after night after night, that's even, you can't do that against good teams or bad teams. Doing that against anyone, period, for that prolonged of a stretch, means something. And that obviously became the case.
Yeah, it means something. And again, it was something that they weren't doing at all last year. How many times did they go up against teams last year where you go, this team has no business being on the court with the Celtics, and you're walking away and Boston's losing, or it's a grind of a game. You're going, well, I don't understand how we can be in this situation with the Celtics. And obviously, that hasn't been the case in the second half. And really, that stretch prior to the Robert Williams injury, when they had this thing, these games were over in the first quarter. Like you said, it was unbelievable, dominant performances by them. Obviously it starts in the defensive end with this team, but it's been impressive.
So we'll get to more playoff talk in a second, but just during this run as a whole, you've been following this team closely for years. What has stood out? What stood out to you the most? What gives you the most confidence that, okay, this can translate to the playoffs, and this isn't just a hot stretch. This is a meaningfully different than what we've seen the last year and a half, 2 years. Whether it's a player or just a certain part of the game, what kind of stood out to you the most through this second half here?
Yeah. So for me, it's three things, right? I think obviously number one, it's something we've been talking a ton about. And when you kind of look at the analytics and everything like that and the 538 models, it's the defense, right? So defensively, this is an elite team, and you've got a lot of really good elite individual performers on the defensive end as well. So obviously, when you have a group of those guys, the team defense, everything, they bought into what Ime is selling. The second factor, I think, is the buy-in factor. You didn't have that last year. It didn't feel like that team really cared or bought in, especially in that Nets series where I think everyone in Boston that likes the Celtics was really fired up for the series, and everyone that was playing for the Celtics felt like they really didn't care. They just kind of rolled over and died. And you can go back pre-bubble to the 2019 team with Kyrie Irving and the way that season ended too, where it just felt like for some reason that mix was just off. And last year it felt like that too. And this year it's the complete opposite. You just see the buy-in factor. These guys feel like they enjoy playing with each other, which I think is certainly was not the case last year, and definitely not in 2019 with Kyrie. And then the third thing for me is it's something that I always look at when you look at teams that are going to make deep runs. And it's pretty simple. But do you have an elite player on your roster, right? If you go through the history of the NBA, B-Rob, there's a couple outliers, but really when you're talking about going all the way back to 1979, I'm a nerd, so I've done this. You're talking about the 2004 Pistons. And outside of that, you have to have a top five player or someone that's flirting with the top five, right? An elite guy. We need you to go get us a bucket. We need you to take over this game. And Jayson Tatum, for me, I don't know if he's in the top five, but he's certainly flirting with it, right? And that kind of step that he's taken over the last couple months, especially, I think is a game changer for this team. And I think that's the main thing for me that kind of changes the ceiling and how I view the Celtics heading into this postseason.
It's to a point now with Tatum, particularly if they close this season strong, this week strong. I don't know if you can keep him off a first team All NBA now. Yeah. Realistically, oh,
you're right. Yeah.
Both ends of the floor, the way he's put up these numbers consistently in the second half of the year. Obviously, the first half of the year, the shooting issues were what they were, but he's now those are. That's a long afterthought at this point. And if you for as much as it's this is bad timing for him. It's too bad he didn't do this last year in terms of, but he's going to see the difference of like, okay, you're on a 50-win team now that's played the best ball in the league in the Eastern Conference in the second half of the year. Like that's because what are you going to do? Like, well, like LeBron should not be all NBA first team. And like, even like a guy like DeRozan, who's been great. The Bulls are falling apart and Durant's been hurt a ton too. So can you give it to him over Tatum? I don't think so.
I find it hard to believe. And look, nobody loves Durant more. I think Durant's probably the best player in the league when he's healthy. But like, what's he played? Like 50 games this year?
Yeah,
so how
like close to 55, maybe.
So I don't know how you could justify that with the sample size that Tatum's put together. Like you said, obviously the shooting wasn't great at the beginning of the year, but we're not talking about a solid 3 months here where he's been elite. And then on top of it, and it's such a good point by you, and we don't talk about it a lot. He's an unbelievable two-way player. Like it's not just the offensive end. Like defensively, he's a stud too. So you talk about the defense, that he's a big part of that. And yeah, I think it's a real conversation. And yeah, for me, I don't know. I don't think you could justify putting Durant on there with the amount of games that he missed versus, Tatum and what he's done. And like you said, with where the Celtics are going to now be a 50-win team, but when all is said and done here, that's a hard ask, which is, again, it's crazy. There's going to be first team all NBA because of the way this year started, but yeah, you can make a real conversation for it. No doubt.
Yeah. The first half of the season, it's like, oh, is he going to make the All-Star team?
Yeah.
That was actually a question at one point.
Yeah.
Now
that stretch, like we talked about, like that Utah game, I think was in the middle of it when like consistently you're seeing like 1 for 8, 1 from 9 from 3. And you're like, oh, like what is going on here? And, ever since then, yeah, he's been locked in. And do you kind of agree with me in terms of, look, top 5 is really aggressive. Like when you look at the players in the league, but like, I think he's right in the mix of guys that you want to build your team around moving forward and guys in the postseason that you kind of want at the end of the game. I mean, he's been really, really impressive. And I think if you have a guy like that on your roster, you got a shot. I really do.
And you look at, I agree with you from the standpoint of if you look at his playoff stats, like a lot of guys are regular season monsters and then become, paper tigers in the obviously everything becomes a lot tougher in the playoffs in general. And you're going to see a lot of guys that the numbers reflect that, where they just can't get their shots. Like they can't create consistently. And Tim, and to his credit, Jaylen Brown too, have both been guys in the postseason where their numbers are pretty, close to where they get in the regular season. And the big question with both those guys, and we'll get to it later, still is, in the team in general, is still the crunch time situation in the postseason. It's obviously hampered them a ton back in the playoff bubble and going all the way back to 2018, et cetera. But on the whole, Tatum is, has enough tricks in his bag where he can get the shots he wants during the postseason, delivers it defensively in the postseason, can't be picked on there. So yeah, like that's certainly borderline top 5 at worst in terms of a postseason player in my mind.
And you just brought it up too. And I think the perfect example we were talking about, honestly, is from the Boston Celtics from 5 years ago now with Isaiah Thomas, where in the regular season stud, but when the postseason came around, we saw it. It got a lot more difficult for him and for that team. Like you said, it's just the postseason's a different animal, right? So you can win a lot of regular season games by just kind of outworking guys and really being engaged on back-to-backs and stuff like that. But, when push came to shove with that team, there was certainly a ceiling. And I think there was a ceiling for Isaiah Thomas in terms of being that number 1 option for you, just because of how size-wise, how limited he was.
We talked about the defense for a bit here. Let's go through
a ricochet shot for Isaiah Thomas, by the way. Come hammer him in the middle of this podcast, but there you go.
Hey man, he's in the Hornets rotation now. Like this is like,
I know they can't get my guy James Bouknight any minutes, but all of a sudden
Isaiah comes in there, right?
Plenty to play PT. It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Just absolutely brutal. All NBA defensive team. Like we talked about the All NBA team there. Tatum's doing a free throw shot there. All NBA defensive teams, there's 2. Smart is obviously going to make, I think, the first team at this point. We can talk about defensive player of the year in a second. Who else? Could we see 2 other Celtics besides Smart on one of those 2 teams? Like, I think Rob Williams is there. And then you look at like Tatum too. I'm like, why should Tatum not be on one? I don't know if he gets there, but like, I think he certainly has a case for it.
It's crazy. And you're right about Robert Williams too. I mean, you look at all the defensive metrics, the guy's a freak. And not even the metrics, just the eyeball test too, for me with Robert Williams. And like you said, smart's a no doubter. I want to get your thoughts on the defensive player of the year stuff too. I know that for a guard to win that is certainly not something that we normally see. So do you think that's a real possibility? But he'll definitely make it. And then you're right, Tatum deserves to be there. And I think, again, defensively and what this team's done. And I think that's why it's so important that Robert Williams hopefully comes back. And I know that sounds like that they're in good shape when it comes to that. But I think when you look at kind of the ceiling for them moving forward, the defense is a big part of it. And yeah, I think all of those guys certainly deserve to be in the conversation, no question.
So the defensive player of the year voting is going to be fascinating to me, because you have a situation here where your traditional big options are on mediocre defenses this year.
Yeah.
Rudy Gobert, the Utah's like 13th in defense. Okay. He should be disqualified for that. Yeah. Giannis, another obvious choice. Bucks are like 11th in defense this year. Like, he'll certainly get votes, but I think, again, there's an opening for the vote to be split. So you look, okay, what are the best defenses this year? You have the Celtics, obviously. You have the Warriors. You know, Draymond Green, if he played a full season, would certainly be in the mix there. He hasn't, so he's out.
Yeah.
The Suns. I know Mikal Bridges has gotten some, like, I guess a little bit of buzz there, but he doesn't have like the cachet that a Smart or someone else does offensively yet. So I'd say like no chance he gets it. Grizzlies are 4th. Jaren Jackson Jr. maybe, but
yeah, maybe that could. I mean, he certainly could be in the conversation, but you're right. Like I think a lot of this name recognition wise with Smart certainly is in his favor as well. You know what I mean? Which again is pretty wild, the comeback that he's had this year, because I thought personally last year he was not overly impressive on the defensive end.
That was a big step back from last year.
Yeah. So for him to kind of bounce back the way he has this year, I think certainly was is impressive. And yeah, when you kind of lay it out like that, especially with the Utah and Gobert, because it feels like he's kind of been penciled in here for a few years now. I think he's definitely in the mix for sure.
Right. And then the other two guys to watch here, Miami does have the 5th best defense. I do think Bam Adebayo could certainly might be in the big in that mix there, but again, he missed a lot of time too with an injury for big chunk of the year. So you wonder if that disqualifies him. And then beyond that, Embiid, I think will certainly be in that conversation. He's in the MVP talk. So I don't know. It's like, it is like the vote. I feel like it's going to be like wide open, and there'll probably be like 5 or 6 guys within like striking distance of getting it once the votes are released. So that's going to be fascinating to watch there. Any other awards you're expecting for these guys this year? Most improved player, coach of the year. Like, you think anything else
Look, I think Ime absolutely should be in the mix for coach of the year. I mean, the job that he's done and the turnaround that they've had, 100%. And hand up, I thought this thing had the real potential to go off the rails at the beginning of the year. When he's publicly calling guys out, you know what I mean, and trying to engage them, and it wasn't working. I'm like, well, this could go south. You don't typically see coaches in the NBA do stuff like that. And so when you see him do things like Ime was doing at the beginning of the year, and also the team isn't necessarily responding, generally I'm like, well, this probably isn't going to end well. But look, to his credit, they've turned it around, and this team's bought in. Like, they're fun to watch. They're engaged. It feels like they 100% not only back their coach, but are kind of feeding into what he's selling. And again, there's not a bigger Brad Stevens fan than me, 100%. But I would be the first to tell you that it felt like at the end of last year, it didn't feel like that team was necessarily responding to Brad. Certainly the way that this team this year is responding to Ime.
It is. I mean, I wrote a couple of critical columns of Ime in like January, which again, long. And to his credit, I stand by what I wrote in those. Like, I think he made the adjustments. Yep. And I also think, like you said, to your point, and just where you brought up Brad, like, I think the front office also made the necessary adjustments. It's like, okay, move out the guys that are, Ime is going to lean on unnecessarily here because they're veterans. Like, just get rid of that. So Peyton Pritchard can play now. You get the full-time versatile guard in Derek White that can just slide right in. and now you have the trade for Tice is just so huge now, because if they didn't have Tice right, now, they'd be in such a world of hurt in terms of like what you got. You throw out Ennis Freedom for like 20 minutes a game in the playoffs. Like, good luck.
You can't do that. You're 100% right. Such a good point. Like, it's a trade that certainly wasn't necessarily well received, or people weren't like clamoring for that deal at the deadline. But now you look at it, pivotal move. And you're right. A lot of it was addition by subtraction too, like Schroeder. And that was the guy that I actually loved that signing in the offseason for them. And obviously, that's why I'm not a GM in the NBA right there.
It's a good value. It should have been a good value.
It should have been. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But but you need more shooting than he was able to give you. So Peyton Pritchard, come on down. Yeah. All right, McKone. Let's get to the nitty gritty here. 1 seed looks out of play. To be honest though, every single team in the East from 5 to 10 is still on the table as an opponent right now, based on where the Celtics finished. You can't do any jockeying yet if you're Ime Udoka. So for you right now, but there are 2 obvious paths you can take. You can take the door number 1, which is, hey, we want the number 2 seed. We want to get home court advantage in the second round no matter what. And we're willing to roll the dice against seeing Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in the first round, which is, I wouldn't say probable, but probably a likely scenario.
Right.
From the 2-7 spot. Yeah. Especially since the Nets won tonight, Hawks and Hornets lost, so they're back in the driver's seat for the 8 spot there. So they look like the Cavs look like they're gonna be 7. Nets are 8. Nets are gonna kick the crap out of the Cavs in the playing game and get that 17. So you're inviting that possibility there. That's door number 1. Door number 2 is take your foot off the gas, win a game to get home court, and then cruise on into the 3 or 4 spot for a first round matchup with the Bulls or Raptors, which I don't think the Celtics care about a ton either way in terms of those matchups. What door are you taking, Tim McKone?
This is so tough. Ultimately, and I've actually come off of the Brooklyn stuff because I've been a big proponent of like, I don't want to see Brooklyn at all. I'm absolutely terrified of them. But the Ben Simmons stuff, I know that they just came out. He's not going to be in the regular season of playing. So maybe I find it hard to believe that he's just going to step in suddenly.
Right. What are you going to get out of him in that situation?
Right. Like that. So to me, you can take that off the table. Reading up on the Seth Curry stuff, he sounds like he said that he needs a month off at some point to get 100%. So, if he's not feeling, 100%, and you don't have 100% Seth Curry, and a team that gives up 270 points a night, it feels like you can score on them, no problem. But ultimately, Kevin Durant's on the roster, and that terrifies me a lot more than. And I like Nick Nurse, but like Durant scares me a lot more than that. So I'm going to go with the second option there. I'm going to try to avoid Brooklyn, but I'm not as scared of them as I once was. I just look, if you can avoid playing Kevin Durant for as long as possible, like that's ultimately the path I'm going to go. And nobody's more down on Kyrie Irving than I am. But he's still really, really good at basketball. And so if he's engaged and you have Kevin Durant, like that's just a matchup that I still don't feel 100% confident in. With the way that Chicago is playing and the Lonzo Ball stuff feels like he's now done. And they've been an absolute mess for a while here. If I can get them, I would have. They should absolutely wipe the floor with Chicago. Toronto is obviously interesting because of the vaccination stuff, but if everything's in order there, despite the fact that Nick Nurse is the coach, I have a ton of respect for them. That's another team that you should take care of business for. Brooklyn, I think you win that series, but am I as confident? No, I'm not. So I'll go with door number 2. What about you?
I'm still door number 2 here because it's Kevin Durant, and you're not going to have Rob Williams in that series, right. And you want to have the best player in the series, and you're not going to have that if you face the Nets. You're easily going to have that if you face the Raptors or if you face the Bulls. And I agree though, like the Bulls are definitely number 1 right now. They're kind of falling apart. It's their defense. It's like, this is what happened. You have Vucevic and like DeRozan, and Zach LaVine is like your defense here. Like it was kind of smoking. They played well in the first half of the season, but that scheme was smoke and mirrors. Obviously, now you take Lonzo out of it. That's one of your best defenders.
Yeah,
things come back to earth there. And so the issue here, though, I think is the Sixers and the Bucks know this too. So I think they're going to be trying to do the exact same thing as you are, and you're playing the Bucks on Thursday.
Yeah.
So what's your play here? Are you resting? They need to win one more game. They need to lock in, I think, one more win to ensure that they have home court to the top 4 teams. Because if the Raptors win out or something like that, they could still theoretically try to fight. It's not going to happen, but I expect them to take care of business against the Bulls on Wednesday and try to beat that team. Against the Bucks, how do you play this if you're Ime Udoka? Are you saying like you playing some guys and resting guys in the second half? Are you just saying, hey, Al, Tatum, Jalen, how's that knee? Oh, we're going to rest second half back time. We're going to rest up Malik Fitz, get out there.
Right.
Get out there. Like what, how obvious are you going to be about this?
I know. And this is the tough part too, because if you're the Celtics and you're Udoka, we're having this conversation and I'm sure they are too, but how do you present that to your guys and then also say hey, we 100% believe in you. You're capable of beating everybody, but we're going to go out of our way to avoid, the Brooklyn. I don't know. It's a tough sell. It's a tough sell. I guess the rest thing, is
you got to rest them because you can't stop playing in the middle of the game, right?
No, you're not going to do that. So you're just not going to dress guys, I think is probably the play, right? But again, look, I think that's the move.
Here's the one thing I guess you can say to go for the 2. One, obviously, it's okay, if you're serious about making a deep run, Rob Williams or no Rob Williams, you should be able to beat a Brooklyn team that probably doesn't have Ben Simmons going. And that shouldn't be. You shouldn't, in theory, be worried about that. Even though we already talked about why you should be to some degree. And then number 2, I do think there's something you said. If you know Philly is going to be that 3 seed, which you're not going to know technically, I think that is ideal. If you can get to the Eastern Conference Finals without having to deal with Miami or Milwaukee, and have them take out each other, that's a big win. So I think that's the counter argument of being okay, you know what? If you beat the Bucks, that probably knocks them down to 4.
Yeah.
You can take the 2, you get home court against Philly, as opposed to being, okay, you have to face the Raptors in the first round, which is from the 4 if you kind of tank it. And then, which I think, that could be you win that series, but that's probably going to be a tough series. And then you have Miami on the road in round 2. You're going to be underdogs in that series, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. When you look at the East, what teams realistically scare you with the Celtics right now? Because for me, I have, we talk about kind of avoiding Brooklyn. And I think part of that for me is just the way that it ended last year. It would just kind of be disheartening if you went out round 1 against Brooklyn this year, coming off of the year that you just had. I don't expect that to happen, but man, that would suck. That would really, that would be a terrible way to end the year. But I think you win that series. I'm not necessarily afraid of them. I might change that, 24 minutes into that series. But as of now, I still think the Celtics win that series. But the 76ers, I'm not afraid of the 76ers. For me, it's really the Bucks, I think, and the Heat are the 2 teams where I think that you're really gonna have your hands full. But the 76ers, I don't buy it. Harden's not the same player he was anymore, for sure. We already know what he is in the postseason. But I don't love that team, especially from a depth perspective now too.
Oh, no question. Their bench is.
It's a joke. Yeah.
They're playing DeAndre Jordan, big minutes off the bench. That tells you all you need to know right now. And then you have, I think in the playoffs, Embiid is still unproven to a degree. I think he's a factor, but you have someone to guard him now Horford.
Yep.
Who has been some of his kryptonite in the past in these moments. Yeah. And then you have a rookie or a second year guy, Maxey, who's who really hasn't shown much on the postseason level yet. Tobias Harris, that's not going to scare anyone. And then and defensively, that whole team, it's you have all sorts of people you can pick on there. So yeah, who does anyone scare you more out of Miami and Milwaukee? If you're going to power rank power rank. Give me the top 5 teams in the East then, like including the Celtics. Then, like, where do you put them? Do you put them behind both those teams?
I don't. I actually have Milwaukee probably 1 just because of Giannis and the fact that team's done it now before. I think the Celtics probably 2. I put Miami behind them a little bit, and I know that they're going to walk away with the 1 seed. Last week wasn't normal. Like the Jimmy Butler, Eric Spoelstra thing, like I can't get that out of my mind. And so they're like, there's something going on there. And who knows, maybe they'll right the ship. But I also think that you're going into that series. And look, I know you did in the bubble as well, saying that we have the best player on the court with Tatum, but like you have the best player in that series in Jayson Tatum. I know there's a lot of nice pieces in Miami. I know it's a really good team. But I think I would take the Celtics against Miami, but it's really those 3 I think have kind of separated themselves. I put the 76ers a notch below them. And then, like you said, Chicago's an absolute mess. Like they're a mess. Cleveland's a disaster now. Brooklyn is what they are, like you said. So I probably put them kind of with the 76ers a notch below those other 3, but I think it's really Miami, Boston, and Milwaukee. I think it's going to be one of those 3 teams coming out of the East. And I'd feel really confident, by the way, if Robert Williams did not get hurt, I really felt good about the Celtics coming out of there. Now we'll have to wait and see what he's like coming back. But I think it's between those 3 teams.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. This winning streak for Miami has kind of turned me the other way. Like I watched a lot of them in Toronto the other night. And we saw what they did against. I don't think the Celtics played particularly well in that game where they went up here. But I think they're starting to get their pieces. Like Lowry is just looking like himself again. And they got all these guys like, Hero is just such a problem for the Celtics, I feel like a lot of the time. And you have the Max Struses of the world who just come out and, they go to Miami and they become, starting caliber players. Yeah. And so again, with that and just the late game issues the Celtics have, and the Rob Williams situation coming back from an injury, knowing how much of a handful Bam will be in that series. Like if Miami has home court there, I'd probably go, Milwaukee 1, Miami 2, Boston 3, Philly 4 and 5, and then, Brooklyn 5 there.
Yeah.
So it's tough because you can't plan for that. Like, you ideally try to get them both in there, but you have no idea how Philly's going to end up the season. You have no idea how Milwaukee's going to end up the season. So that's, that 2, 3, 4 thing is going to come down to the last day of the year, probably in all likelihood, which makes it a huge bear to plan for.
No, it's crazy. I don't think there's any other team, honestly, in the East when you look at this, though. And like you said, I think Chicago at the beginning of the year was certainly impressive. That thing's fallen apart. Toronto, I just don't think has the horses. Obviously, although Siakam and Scotty Barnes have both been impressive to me, at least this year. Then Cleveland. Is Mobley going to be back for the postseason?
I think so. I think he's supposed to. Yeah, I think he should be ready to go. It sounds like Jared Allen supposedly will be ready to go. I mean, I honestly don't expect him to get out of the play-in.
No.
They'll
right.
probably lose to Charlotte or Atlanta after they get their ass kicked by the Nets in that 7-8 game, which is too bad because that was like a really fun story.
No, it was.
And also, and that should be they should be the reason they're why the play-in tournament sucks. It's you have a great feel-good story. This team should be in the playoffs, but no, you get injuries at the end of the year and you're screwed.
And then you're gone. And then the Hawks are probably the most disappointing team, I think, either them or the Knicks obviously had some buzz going into the year, but the Hawks have been. That's not a team I'm scared of, and certainly not something I think the Celtics would care about if they somehow got out and then you were playing them.
All right, well. That will do it for us here. We have 6 days left here to kind of go through all these scenarios, figure out where things are going to land. Well, I guess we'll end with this. What's your prediction? Where do they end up in the seeding here?
I think they're going to wind up as the 2 seed, and I think I'll go as far as the Eastern Conference Finals, B-Rob, and then then I'll have to come back on the pod.
The recalibrate then.
If they're going to make a finals run or not. Yeah, which means, by the way, they'll get knocked out. They'll get swept in the first round there.
Yeah, the Nets. Durant goes for 64 straight games.
Yeah, exactly. Irving will stomp on the logo again. Everyone, that'll be it. Yeah,
I tell you what, That the Garden will be, if that's game 1, Celtics Nets.
Oh,
that will be first. Get all the ass clowns out of the Garden who could freaking throw bottles, like be complete idiots.
Yeah.
But from a atmosphere perspective,
it'll be on fire.
It's gonna be that'll be something else.
Yeah.
But I like it. I like where your head's at. And then where's your Rob Williams return prediction? What does he come back early? Surprise return in the first round or second round?
I would love it. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just like optimistic and then just super naive because like I'm still waiting for Shaq to come back. And what year was that? Was that
2011.
2011.
The cap is fine.
Yeah, exactly. No, he's coming back. Don't worry about it. So yeah, Shaq never came back. KG in 2009, same thing.
Yeah.
But this feels different, I guess. And it's Stevens, not Ainge. So who knows? Maybe this is actually going to happen. But for some reason, I'm optimistic with this one. And if he comes back, I think that's a game changer. Like I said, I was borderline overly confident they were coming out of the East when they were. I mean, because they were just destroying teams at that point. And so we'll see. Hopefully he comes back and they can kind of pick up where they left off because they were a wagon.
Yeah, you gotta hope you're gonna have to be at full strength to get out of this Eastern Conference.
Yeah,
I think regardless, and if they can get there, that will make things what should be awesome East playoffs. Period. Like all the more fun in the final 2 rounds here. But Tim McKone, this was a lot of fun. Make sure you're following Tim. Follow Tim at Tim_McKone on Twitter for a bunch of Celtics and UConn takes and bad jokes. And no, actually they're good. No, Tim's one of the best deadpan jokes out there on Twitter. So make sure you're following on there.
There you go.
So check him out there. He'll be back soon enough here on the Wing Plays Pod. Meantime, rate, review, subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, and we will be back with you guys later this week. Thanks for listening.